I'm going to talk about another interesting topic, and which is in fact a continuation of what we discussed in the morning, that is the Indian regeneration, socio-economic origins. Uh, so as far as the Indian regeneration is concerned, well, I think you people have already, uh, studied this paper, and you people have been teaching, I think, in the classrooms. But here, I'm going to present a different view of Indian regeneration. What is the meaning of regeneration here? And we can parallelly and synonymously, you can use other terms also: Indian Renaissance, Indian rebirth, Indian awakening, etc., etc., Indian efflorescence, etc. So in the morning, we were dealing with what's called the 18th century India, and there we actually discussed the way how India actually entered into early modern period. Now we are in the 19th century. So in the 19th century also we see a number of developments, and the British colonialism had entrenched itself very strongly in India, and the British had already started, exploiting India in different ways, and we have already referred to various stages of exploitation: mercantile capitalism, industrial capitalism, and financial capitalism, etc., etc. Through these stages, the British actually went on exploiting us. This is one thing as far as the economic aspect is concerned. I think you have already discussed the economic nationalism, the rise of economic nationalism. I saw one of the topics in your timetable. Have you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Means
Economic nationalism was discussed.
Economic nationalism.
Yes, sir.
I will also, touch upon this aspect in a very, very brief manner, since it has already been discussed. I'm not going to waste my time on that. This is also one of the, components of this particular topic, Indian regeneration. So, in the 18th century, the British colonial administration was imposed on India, and in the 19th century, the colonialism started operating in a very, very powerful manner. And now, what is interesting to note is that the British, after imposing their colonial rule on India, they found it extremely difficult to rule over the entire country because of so many reasons. I need not explain it again. And one of the major reasons was the ignorance about Indian languages, Indian customs, Indian traditions, Indian revenue systems, etc., etc., etc. And at the same time, the British also did not have a what called database as far as the Indian system of administration is concerned. Now the British wanted to create, information about the various aspects of Indian administration, whether it is related to public administration, or whether it's related to judiciary, or various canons, or it is education system, etc., etc. Now, since India was considered as a backward land by the British, which is inhabited by highly ignorant people, the British thought in terms of introducing reforms in India. Now, introducing reforms in India is a very big problem for them. Problems are different, things, of the different problems, in the sense that the British were afraid of introducing reforms as far as the Indian society is concerned, Indian culture is concerned, Indian religion is concerned, because their strength was very limited in India. And these people were still in the process of consolidating their conquests in India. They had not captured the entire country, and now they were doing it step by step. So introducing, radical revolutionary reforms in India would be a problem for the British, because the Indians may rebel against the British, because you have already seen in 1857 what happened. So the Indians would rebel, and therefore the British, and they were always warned by the British government in England. They said that as far as the Indian society is concerned, culture is concerned, religion is concerned, the East India Company should follow a policy of non-intervention or neutrality. So neutrality was one of their principles. They were not interfering, because one thing is very important. That is that as long as people are ignorant, so long administration would be very easy for the British. And if the people become very what's called radicalized, or very knowledgeable or enlightened, well, they will create problem. They will seek political rights. They will question the nature of administration, etc., etc. And therefore, in the beginning, the British, because of various reasons, strategic reasons, also they did not, intervene in the Indian traditions and all. But at the same time, debates were going on within England whether we should keep a country, as an ignorant, nation, whether India should remain as a backward country, whether British have a duty towards the Indians, just we are looting them, or whether we have a moral duty to educate them, to enlighten them, or by introducing some reforms, cleansing their society, whether that kind of moral duty is there for us. No, in England, that kind of debate was going on, and now one of the schools there was arguing that the British government should take over Indian princely states, and place them under their direct control. And if princely states were occupied and they were placed under the British rule, direct rule, then what will happen is that it will be very difficult, very easy for the British to introduce the reforms in that country, whether it is related to caste system, or whether it is related to education or anything. It will become very easy. If you are going to introduce reforms through the agency of a princely princess or the state, administrators, it would be difficult. There will be a lot of, hindrances. So this is one of the arguments which actually made the British to, capture states one after another. But again, the British were very cautious. They thought that it would lead to rebellion, and if rebellion takes place, the British would not stand a chance of staying there anymore, because Indians would be, Indians would overwhelm them in terms of a number and all. Now, the British, in this way, were in confusion whether to introduce reforms or they should maintain neutrality and only focus on economic aspects, economic administration, and loot the country, and siphon of the wealth to England. Now, many liberals in England did not like this idea, and they said that there is a moral duty, towards Indians. Now, as far as Indian regeneration is concerned, the British were of the view that they were actually holding a country which is totally, what's called backward, which is full of, social evil, and social, evils, which is full of ignorant beliefs, etc., etc. So they decided to introduce reforms here. And when they decided to introduce reforms, there was a feeling among British officers that once upon a time, India was a very was a very what called advanced civilization. Indians had a very advanced civilization, and in terms of science, in terms of mathematics, in terms of say geography, in terms of medicine, anything, Indians had great achievements at that time. But over a period of time, because of various innovations, because of various problems and challenges they faced from outside, And because of the rules or administration by foreigners, well, Indians actually, suffered losses, and their civilization suffered losses, and it became a arrested civilization. It became an arrested civilization because it was progressing very fast, but at one stage it got arrested, it became stagnant, and today what we see is the social stasis. So it is an stagnant water, and this stagnant water is stinking. It is actually emitting stench, and therefore the British have a duty to introduce reforms in India and bring about social change and make these people modern. This is one thing that we have to bear in mind. So regeneration here is that idea, and in that context, I am using this word regeneration. And now this regeneration word became very popular because of Karl Marx. And Karl Marx actually was writing about India in the 1850s. Though Karl Marx never visited India, like Max Muller. Max Muller wrote voluminously about India, but he never visited India. And in the same way, many people actually wrote about India without visiting India. And Karl Marx actually wrote in sometime in 1853 or so about India, and he said that in India there is a prospect of regeneration, and he felt that England has two mission to perform to fulfill in India. One is destructive. One mission is destructive, mission. Another one is regeneration or regenerating the Indian, social life. So he made, because of him, this word became very popular: regeneration or regenerating the Indian system here. What is the meaning of these things? Destructive. And Karl Marx actually thought that the Indian economy is based on agriculture, fully based agriculture, and it is a peasant-dominated society, and therefore capitalism cannot emerge here very easily, and therefore here, this what you say, this proletariat revolution or communist revolution, cannot take place unless the actually agricultural economy gets converted to what's called a capitalist economy, industrial economy. So one of the aspects which he was suggesting to the British was that they should perform a destructive function. That is that the old Asiatic society must be annihilated, must be destroyed. So if old Asiatic society, which is based on feudal mode of production, if that society is destroyed, and then what will happen is that it will lead to the emergence of capitalist society. It's not very easy. It's a long process, but he says. And another one is what's called regeneration. Regeneration, in the sense you are actually creating conditions which will be beneficial for launching in a capitalist revolution here, which would lead to communist revolution in the later stages and proletariat domination. So the second thing he says that laying of the material foundation of Western society in Asia. So first you have to perform destructive mission. Second thing is regeneration, and regeneration means here laying of material foundation, of Western society in Asia. So because Asian society is backward, it is under feudal mode of production or Asiatic mode of production. He uses the word Asiatic mode of production. And now, unless Western society is established in India, Western society in the sense, transporting Western ideas, transporting the methods of Western system production, and popularizing Western education, etc., etc. So he said that regeneration is very important because it will lay a material foundation for future revolutions. So this is the idea that Karl Marx actually popularized in those days, but he was very, very critical of the British. Now, we shall discuss the Indian regeneration in a very brief manner. What I am trying to say here is how the British actually introduced, reforms in India on the one hand, and on the other hand, how the British unknowingly unknowingly and unintentionally, actually creating a situation which would help, for regeneration in India. That is very important. Knowingly and unknowingly, whenever actually British introduced reforms in India, they introduced it with the intention of some colonial, benefits, with the intention of garnering more and more benefits. But sometimes, whatever reforms they introduced, without, being known by them, created like a lot of benefits for the Indians, which actually in the later stage became a weapon for the Indians to beat the British. For example, English language. For example, English language. Now, as far as regeneration is concerned, there are two important things that we actually have to bear in mind. Whether India was a nation in the 19th century. I'm asking you a very simple question. Whether India was a nation in terms of geography, in terms of political concept, etc., etc. So you have 1857 movement. And 87 movement actually one of the greatest movements that we actually see in the history of the world. But as we know, the revolt of 1857 failed. Failed, when you say failed, it did not succeed in driving out the British. But to some extent, it succeeded in the sense that it actually changed the orientation of British administration. But one of the reasons for the failure of the British, 1857 movement was that one is the limited notion of India, as a nation among the people of India. So people of India never thought that India was a nation at the time because of so many factors, because of lack of knowledge, we can say, and there are a lot of debates whether India was a nation. Of course, there was a cultural concept of India. There was a very vague geographical concept also of India as a nation. And this notion was not very popular among everybody in India. This is one important reason for the failure of the 1857, lack of what's called the understanding about India as a nation, as a political entity. Second important thing is that, in India at that time, the people were divided on the basis of caste and community. So you had a very a vast hierarchy of caste and communities in India, and among them there was no unity, and this also caused in a great failure of the 1857 movement. So these two aspects actually, in the later stages, led to the creation of what you say a process called regeneration that we shall see in a brief manner. So India, geographically and culturally, a very well-known concept at that time, but it was known among a very limited section of educated people and administrators or officials, and then merchants, you can say, and at the same time, people and the soldiers who actually traveled here and there. And except them, there was very little meaning and significance for the rest of the population in India. You can say this is very important that we have to bear in mind. Second thing is that, and therefore, this 1857 movement did not spread throughout India. You have taught that from Haryana to Bihar was the core region, and in other regions it was in a very what's a low key, you can say. It was a low key affair, and people who spoke Hindustani language or the dialect, participated in this movement, and in other areas, in other linguistic regions, this movement did not, take a very strong root, you can say. So this weakness actually led to the failure of this movement. At the same time, though the rebels actually made proclamations in the form of nation and all, it did not carry much meaning. And as you know, the second point is that Hindus and Muslims, together fought the 1857 movement. But as far as the castes and communities are concerned, the divisions between people are concerned, well, we definitely say that it also created a lot of problems. And you will be surprised to note that one of the major grievances of the upper class people and also high class nobles and all against the British was that these people are not respecting the caste rules. They are not
Right.
respecting the caste rules. So that means they were making everybody, bringing everybody together and making them to fight together in the wars and other things. So the people were angry. High caste people, upper class people, and the elite people, whether they are in Hindu society or in Muslim society, they were very angry because in the proclamations, Delhi proclamations of 1857, given by the rebel leaders, we can definitely find out references to these things where they were expressing anger against the British, saying that you are not respecting the caste rules. And I can quote any number of statements here. So now, this process of regeneration now was aiming to, evolve, India as a what's called a political entity as a nation. So one of the major, objectives of the regeneration process was to evolve the concept of India as a political entity, as a nation, by bringing together people of various areas. And this is a very, very long process. And second thing is that, here, as far as the caste and community problem is concerned, and completely removing the divisions and making these people, bringing them together and strengthening the nation. No, bringing people together and making them united means you are creating a nation. And that is why when we say nation state, nation represents people and state represents geographical area. Now, how did actually this process actually start in the first place? And we shall deal with that in a very systematic way. And as far as the first thing is concerned, this regeneration process was initiated by the British in the beginning. That we have to appreciate. How did they do it? The first process was that they introduced printing, machine in India. No, this printing was not known to the Indians as it was used in modern Europe. Of course, there were some crude methods were there, and according to some historians, one of the major vehicles through which this regeneration process was started was that the actually British introduced these printing things in India, and I will be brief here. As far as though printing process was introduced in India, facility was introduced in India, which was used in Europe from the 15th century itself. There were different types of printing system, letter type printing or lithography printing and all those things. But as far as India is concerned, well, printing was introduced, and first what they did was that here the locals also used that, and they used it to copy the ancient texts or whatever beliefs they had as far as their religion is concerned, whatever customs they had as far as their religion is concerned. Such books were, produced, and these things, in fact, very strongly created a love for traditions, a love for their culture, and traditionalism continued, conservatism continued. It did not bring any major changes in the Indian thinking. And printing brought major changes only when the printing press was used to produce newspapers or what you say, periodical journals, what you say. So when they started producing periodical journals, it began to create wide awareness among the people. Here, for example, the British who came to India brought printing presses because they wanted to print their letters, their gazetteers, their proceedings, their various things and all. Now, some British businessmen, British journalists, British travelers, who came to India, they began to, print newspapers or journals in English, and began to circulate it. For example, Ikis Gazette. Ikis Gazette was one of the very popular gazettes that actually found its entry into India in 1780. And in that, they were actually talking about the British policies. They were very critical also. Ikis Gazette was very critical, and there was a lot of opposition to it. by the British only, and they closed it. And in the same way, a person called James Buckingham, he started producing a newspaper called Calcutta Journal, and he was not very critical of the British, but he was trying to bring out the problems of the British people, and also he was actually bringing out the lapses of British administrators to the public, and he became popular to some extent, and he did not continue for long. But now this was imitated by the Indians. A Bengali weekly came into existence now, and this Bengali week was called Samachar Darshan, founded by some journalists in Bengal, and it lasted till 1841. And in the same way, in Calcutta, in Bombay, in Pune, in other areas, in Gujarati language, in Marathi language, in English language, many newspapers began to emerge. And during the 1857 movement, you may have heard the name of that particular paper called the Delhi Urdu Akhbar, a very famous thing. And this paper became so popular that it actually went against the British, condemned the British, and incited the people against the British. And finally, when Delhi was captured in the year 1858 by the British, well, its editor, Muhammad Bakar, was killed by the British. So in this way, newspapers emerged here, journals emerged here, and the Indians began to read these things, and this actually created a kind of awareness among the Indians about the nature of British administration, and this is one of the very important stages in Indian regeneration. And this was unheard of, because during the Mughal period there was no newspapers. The concept was very absent totally. And whether it is Maratha state or any other state, you did not come across anything, because education was not part of in their administration. Only in elite classes actually had the opportunity of learning. So this is one thing that we have to bear in mind, how these people used the printing press to create a kind of awareness among the Indians. So the British were responsible, and when British actually introduced printing, they did not think that this would become very popular among Indians. They also imitated that, and instead of supporting the British, they began to expose the weaknesses in the British administration. This is one important thing. And then, of course, when the Indians actually began to oppose the British, a famous, one of the infamous acts was passed by the British, that is Lytton's Press Act. Vernacular Press Act. You must have heard about the Vernacular Press Act, and they tried to subdue the Indian, press, and they failed, and it began to spread like anything, and it went on creating awareness. That is the thing. And another thing which actually helped Indians to create a kind of awareness about the nature of British rule on the one hand, and also the need to put an end to the British rule and to take over the administration by the Indian, was the postal system. The postal system, of course, it was a new concept. During the time of the Rajas, they had a different kind of thing, but here, using the stamps and Afana stamp and sending letters and all those things in a systematic way was one of the major contributions of the British. Though the British did not want the people to use it as a mode to spread nationalistic ideas, it did become an important source of awareness, you can say. And Warren Hastings made it cheaper, and many new elements were introduced here, and electric telegraphs were used in India, and these things also became a major was a source of communication of information, and information began to spread very fast. That is a very important thing that you have to bend. Another important source of communication, which actually helped for the regeneration of India, is what's called none other than railway system. So the railway system became popular in England in the 1830s, and 1830s onwards. railways were imported to India, and railways came to India mainly as an instrument of exploitation of the Indians, because railways were used to collect the raw materials from the areas of production and then shipping them to the portal areas and then thereby shipping them to England. And at the same time, railways were used to carry the finished products of Britain to interior areas and then market them. And another what called benefit for the British in the railway system was it enabled them to transport soldiers or their army and weapons in a very systematic and quick manner to suppress rebellions and also control areas. But as far as the railways is concerned, it actually helped the Indians in the sense that it actually brought together the Indian people from different part of the country. And many people say that without railways, well, the Indian National Congress would not have survived for long. And Indian National Congress held its meetings in different parts of India. And the first meeting was held in the Indian National Congress held its first meeting in
Bombay, sir.
Bombay. Yes, the first meeting. And Irfan Habib, in his book, The National Movement, says that
Bombay, sir.
without the railway system, the first national meet of the Indian National Congress would not have taken place in Bombay. So railways actually became one of the major sources of information, major sources of dissemination of information. Also helped the people to meet different people in different areas. This is one thing. But what happened was that though railway network went on spreading in India, well, it also helped what's called give employment opportunities to Indians. Nobody could rise to higher positions there. And at the same time, what you have to see is that this railway system did not lay a foundation for the industrialization of India. Now, the Indians who actually observed the development in England or in Germany or in other places where railways actually played a major role in bringing about industrialization or in industrial revolution, thought that railways were not doing the same thing in India, and therefore India is actually, suffering recession, and railways should be what's called made an instrument of industrial progress. But this was not happening. And now they also began to think that if they want to have a modern India, if they want to have an industrial India, well, they should, control the destiny of India. Only when they come to control the destinies of India, well, India will progress. So this is another major thing that you have to bear in mind. Then as far as the Indian regeneration is concerned, the third aspect is education. Education. Now we go, we actually deal as far as Indian Renaissance is concerned by taking up the contributions of individuals, Raja Ram Mohan Rai or Dayananda Saraswati and other things. But here, all these people could emerge because of these things. And education becomes a very important thing here. And this education, and through education, inflow of modern ideas, inflow of modern ideas. And these inflow of modern ideas took place because of English language, because of English language. Now, the British introduced, education in India in order to produce clerks. Because India had a very big bureaucracy. The British had a very big bureaucracy, and recruiting bureaucracy from India is difficulty because of lack of language, the lack of knowledge of language. Yes.
ಇವತ್ತೇನೋ ಒಂಥರ ಹಿಂಸೆ.
So
ಶಾಂತರಾಜು ಸರ್ ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಸರ್. ಶಾಂತರಾಜು ಸರ್,
some disturbance is taking place. Please switch off your mic. Okay. Shall I continue another 20 minutes?
Please, sir.
ಹಿಂಸೆ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. Because this is the time when you people actually teach, and this is not the time to listen. It's very difficult. to listen. And therefore, please tolerate for another 20 minutes because I can understand your problem since 10 o'clock. You have been sitting like this, and it is not good for health also. Sitting continuously for 6 hours means it's a very difficult thing. Anyway, friends, the thing is that refresher course, this is refresher or reorientation? Refresher course. So refreshing your mind. You'll have to keep on refreshing your mind, and that's what the British also said at that time. Unless you become very active in terms of creating information, knowledge, well, you are not going to achieve anything because knowledge became power in among the British. And there is a very big debate about knowledge and power. So after coming to India, what the British did was that they looked at the Indian, literary what's called area, and also other areas. They came to know that the Indians did not produce anything which could be rationally accepted, which could be scientifically accepted. They mocked at their history, they mocked at their geographical knowledge, they mocked at their medical knowledge and everything. And they, introduced medicine. And they introduced medicine, that is Western medicine, allopathy medicine, and condemned Indian, what's called Ayurveda medicine or local medicines. And medicine became a weapon to capture British, I'm sorry, the Indians. Okay, so medicine became a tool of empire. There's a very great book called Tools of Empire, written by Daniel Hedrick, and he says that medicine became a tool as far as capturing India is concerned, because by using military, they captured the geography of India. By using English language and English medicine, they captured the body of Indians, mind of Indians. So what they said was that the creation of knowledge is very important. They went on creating knowledge. And if you are a research scholar, if you have already completed your research, you must have gone through the gazettes written by the British. And all the gazettes which were written before 1947 were British products. And they created this gazette. You just go through the gazettes, Bombay Gazetteer, Madras Gazetteer, South Canada Gazetteer, or Dharwad Gazetteer. All these gazettes were written by British officers, and they wrote these things as a what's called as a manual, because they wanted to give it to their officers. Go through this and rule the territory. And they, from geography down to trade, down to agriculture, everything is there. And when you read, even history also, and when you read gazetteers, British will create an impression in your mind that that we actually created you a rational situation to live in, and also a great civilization. Before British rule, there was no civilization. You people were backward. You people were living like an uncivilized community. But after the coming of the British, we removed all those things, backwardness, created a new society, and you people are enjoying the benefit of the British. And reading Gazette itself made the Indians to love the British. And in regeneration of what's called process, we must remember that Raja Ram Mohan Rai, or whether it's Dayananda Saraswati, or whether it's what's called Rana De, or Ramesh Chandra Dutt. Have you heard the name of Ramesh Chandra Dutt? You heard the name of Ramesh Chandra Dutt?
Economic historian, sir.
Yeah, you must have discussed this, thesis. All these people only said that if you continue our support to the British, they will rule India in a good manner, better manner, and they will create a lot of facilities for us. And they never asked the British to leave India. So this is one of the important aspects that the regeneration process actually telling us. So the British created information about India. The history books they wrote. They collected information from the Brahmin Pandits. They collected information from the Maudis. They collect information from the other, priestly classes, and they interpreted the history. And they wrote. They said that before our coming, you had a dictatorship, you had a dark age, and after our coming, you have a new age, and you are enjoying a glorious age, and you people are undergoing a transformation, and you should be grateful for us. We removed sati. Yes, in regeneration they say we removed sati and created the a good atmosphere for women community. Otherwise, women actually suffer inequality. These people did not enjoy any right, and every society, every community, every religion exploited women. But we actually, removed sati, put an end to child marriage. We put an end to other malpractice and created a grand society. Now, when Indians were taught these things through the gazettes, through their textbooks in the universities and colleges by the British teachers, Indians offered their loyalty to the British. They became more loyal to the British. And the British said that if we leave the country, again feudal elements will come back and they will rule you, and India will go back to medieval period. And that is called legitimacy. So when British actually ruled, they sought legitimacy, manyate in Kannada we say, they sought legitimacy, they got legitimacy from the people of India. The people of India actually supported the British rule, and that is why it continued. So this regeneration process, in fact, was a two-way. On British actually introduced, various kinds of what's called administrative measures in India, and these measures actually made Indians to make use of them and bring about social reforms, economic reforms, and all. At the same time, Indians thought that the British were doing good for us by removing all these things, but at the same time, Indians also thought that we should also reform our society. We should also reform our society. If we don't remove, if we don't have self-introspection, if we don't make a self-analysis, if we don't make a self-criticism, we are going to be destroyed by the British. We are going to be destroyed by the Christian missionaries. And therefore, let us accept the British principles and reform our society and challenge the Christian, padris or missionaries who are actually condemning us. So our self-respect will be revived, and our self-respect will help us to fight against the British and make our nation a strong nation. So the British were telling that India was not a nation. And the Indians actually trusted this, believed this. But ultimately, during the process of regeneration, renaissance, Indians began to think that India is becoming a nation. India is becoming a nation. The process of becoming a nation, is already underway, and therefore, in re-engineering, in regeneration, we, find a process of evolution of making India a nation, a political entity is being carried out, and at the same time, well, making Indian society a tolerant society, and at the same time, a society with equality by removing all sorts of inequalities that existed on the basis of sex, that existed on the basis of caste, or creed, or community, and all those things. So these are the things. And now I'll be summarizing very fast. Education, all of how did the education actually help the British, help the British in consolidating the colonial structure there. So English language, you look at the English language, even today, we actually hesitate to speak our language, local language, but we speak with English language. And if a person speaks English very fluently, we offer him great respect. And that is the colonial legacy. And the British actually created this because English was our master's language. Our master spoke that language. I am also speaking that language, and therefore, I am almost nearer to my master, and he secured recognition in society, etc., etc. Anyway, here as far as education is concerned, I'm not going to deal with the very detailed manner these things. This education actually came to India, through Christian missionaries. And Christian missionaries, whether they are in Sirampur or whether it in Tankeba or in other areas, the missionary schools were established. And there, in the 1850s or May 15 or 20 or 25, many schools were there run by missionaries, and many people got educated there. And the English education actually helped the Indians to have access to Western ideas. The Western ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, or liberalism, or nationalism, or other things, or constitutionalism and other things. And at the same time, through these things, some humanitarian ideas also came to India. Humanitarian idea in the sense, for example, slavery is bad because slavery was there in India. And then ill treatment of women, inequality of women, that was also was condemned by the British ideas. So these things actually came to India ideas, and they began to enlighten Indians about their social evils. So now in 1843 or so, slavery was abolished in India. When slavery was abolished in India, almost everybody became equal, and no longer slavery existed legally. Illegally it will actually continue. So the British introduced the English education in order to strengthen their hold on India, to make the administration easy. But at the same time, what happened is this English education was made available to the elite society. In India, elite society in the sense, for example, the Jamindari system you have in Bengal. So Jamindari is families and nobles. These people actually could have approached them because they had money. These Jamindari elements, they had leisure, they had prestige, and they had other things, and therefore they learned these languages, and they became the leaders of change. The British thought that these people would become the leaders of change. And when this language became known to some elite community, and of course, educated class was very limited at that time, they began to refer to the European ideals, Rousseau or Bentham or Voltaire or other people. So they talked about liberty, they talked about democracy, they talked about civil rights and all. And they talked about what's your independence and all those things. And these ideas began to impact on Indian minds. And English language, in fact, brought the Enlightenment ideas to India, and many people were attracted by that. Many colleges actually came into existence there. And when this language was growing like this, and when Indians were becoming attracted by this English language, for example, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar or Rajaram Mohan Rai or other people, they insisted on the British that this language should be taught to common people also. And there was a debate whether English should be made available to everybody. And the famous Macaulay minutes. Have you heard about Macaulay minutes? No.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Uh,
Yes, sir.
which year, madam? It was published.
1835.
Very good. Very good. 1835, the Macaulay minutes, submitted by Thomas Babington Macaulay. And this Macaulay's famous statement, whether you know the famous statement that Macaulay made.
He traveled throughout India. I didn't see any beggar, any thieves, any robbers. But British India, this kind of continued. Ultimately, we are a sufferer.
No, that's one thing that.
Yes, sir. That the libraries of Britain are one stack of Indian library is equivalent to like entire library of Britain is the
entire Indian and Arabian
Yeah,
source of
together.
literature is equal to
Madam, sir, European in mind, Indian interest.
Yeah, but no, the famous statement of Macaulay is that if we introduce English language, and if the natives learn this language,
can
then
create,
what will happen is
a
that we are
people
giving,
like
yeah, definitely, we are going to create a class of people who would be British, who would be Indians in blood and color, but British in terms
In
of
mind.
intellect,
mind.
in practice,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
in
Yes.
other things. So this group will act as a leader, in disseminating English language, to their community. And he actually popularized a famous theory called filtration theory.
Downward filtration theory.
Yeah. This filtration theory actually was popularized, but it did not become a reality. But what I'm trying to say is that Macaulay made another famous statement that Indian people being educated in English, being educated by us, if one day they demand self-governing institutions. Self-governing institutions, we should not hesitate to give them self-governing institutions. But I don't know when that day will come. That is the famous statement. So when they
You
gave
predicted
education, they were saying that a day will come when they in being educated by the English men. Well, they may demand what kind of political reforms, political reforms in the sense, democratic institution they demand. And if that day comes, well, we should not hesitate to give them that privilege of being governed by themselves, creating self-governing institutions. So I don't know when that day will come. So English education, of course, a lot of things we can talk about English education, but here what we see is that this English education, began to spread very fast. And the British were not very much interested in the beginning in establishing colleges and all because it would cost, it would involve cost, and therefore they actually, simply abandoned this project. They abandoned the project of spreading education. They went on bringing about some reforms. For example, in 1854, you have the famous, Wood's Dispatch, and in 1882, another, act was passed by the. But the British, English education in India began to spread by Indian efforts, by Indian money and by Indian donations. A number of colleges were established, and the English educated people, began to emerge, and they became the future leaders of these things. And here, one very important thing in the Indian regeneration is the role played by the middle class. The role played by the middle class, which was a middle class, who actually formed the middle class. And this is a very difficult problem. Bourgeois. Karl Marx actually used the word bourgeois. And when he says bourgeois, the people who actually lived in town area, urban areas with money, and they were with some capital, bourgeois. So here, the Indian middle class actually began to emerge during this period, in the sense that the English educated people, became lawyers, became teachers, became journalists, and some people went to business. Some people, took up other, aspects of other jobs of profit, and there came to be created a small class of English educated people, which was called middle class. And this middle class, became very vocal in demanding concessions on the British. They began to demand concessions. For example, tax concessions. For example, what you say, more number of Indians in the administration, Indianization of administration. And one of the most important demands they made was that, they demanded the British to conduct civil service examinations both in England and India. They said that it should be conducted both in India and England. Otherwise, the civil service will become the sacred precinct of the Europeans only, and Indians will suffer. So this is another very important thing that you have to bear in mind. So English education in this way helped the emergence of middle class. Though British liked it or not liked, whether the British were actually doing it consciously or unconsciously, a middle class emerged, and they played a very good role in the later stages. They were not revolutionary. One of the problems with this Indian regeneration is that many of the reformers, many of the people who actually demanded reforms were not revolutionaries, like Balagangadhar Tilak. Many of them were moderates. Many of them, thought that the British rule in India should continue, because if the British rule comes to an end, well, we will go back to medieval period. When despots come back and start ruling India, and they actually wished well for the British Queen, and they said that the British rule in India should continue for a longer period, and under that British rule, Indians should flourish. So this is the thing, and this kind of education, which the British gave, actually created the what's it called, a new development called Indian Renaissance. I'm not going to speak about literature, about architecture, about other things and all. I'm only focusing on making India a nation, and also by making Indians aware of their social problems and are aware of their economic grievances. So finally, within 5 minutes, I will conclude. You have society. So I have taken up the Indian regeneration, social and economic origins here. And society, this regeneration process, how did it actually start? Newspapers, railways, and other things, and at the same time, education and all. But reforming Indian society is another major stage that we come across in Indian regeneration. Indian society came to be focused on by various Indians, by British also. And you have already referred to the missionaries' activities who actually tried to abolish slavery in India and try to give equality to women and all. But here, as far as society is concerned, many people, include Raja Ram Mohan Rai or Dayananda Saraswati and other people, began to think about Indian society because they thought that, if the British keep on condemning the Indian society, missionaries keep on condemning society, well, Indians cannot raise their head in self-respect. You cannot create a nation of people who are proud about their culture. Because when your culture is being insulted, when your culture is being degraded, well, you cannot have any pride about that. And now, as far as Raja Ram Mohan Rai is concerned, he never said that Indians should adopt Christianity. He only said that whatever loopholes we have in our society, it should be cleansed by looking at these problems through the prism of reason and science. So use your reason, use rationalism, and find out whether this particular practice is correct or wrong. If this particular practice is not according to your reason, not according to our scientific belief, then give it up. So he preached monotheism. He actually condemned idol worship, and he pleaded for high place for women, and all those things you have already studied. Unitarianism he actually supported. So all these things. So Raja Mohan Rai, in the same way, Dayananda Saraswati. Dayananda Saraswati, of course, he was an out and out, proponent of Indian culture, ancient Indian culture. And he also said that in the Indian religion that we see today is not the original religion. So he made a very famous statement. What is that statement?
Back to Veda.
Yes. He made that famous. That means that he said that whatever evil things that we see in our religion, they're all accretions. Over a period of time, these accretions have taken place. Bad elements actually entered into Indian society. But originally, it was very pure, very simple, and caste system was not there, and idol worship was not accepted by him. And at the same time, he also asked his students to develop a scientific bent of mind, because science and reason became very important during Renaissance period. So unless you view everything with this in the background, well, you are going to continue as an ignorant person. So this is a very important development that we say. So Indian society in this way received lot of boost from regeneration process. And here this regeneration started cleansing the Indian religion, and various people you have in Maharashtra, some people doing it, Ranade, or the another famous person in Bengal, this Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Many people actually focused on women's status. They actually, try to remove all those evils. Swami Vivekananda, Jyotiba Phule, who became an inspirer for the great Ambedkar. So all these things. So 19th century, in the same way as the 18th century, a very important century, because in the 18th century we see transition taking place into colonialism, but in the 19th century, colonialism, started yielding, positive result in the form of social reform. Sati was removed, as you know. Many other things were also removed. Among Muslims also, Sayyid Ahmad Khan and all those people, did it. And one more aspect before I conclude is the rise of economic nationalism. So during the Renaissance period, you also find economic nationalism rising itself. And that's, of course, at that time, nobody actually used the word economic nationalism. It became very popular after Bipin Chandra used that word. Bipin Chandra's famous book, you must have heard, India's struggle for independence, Bipin Chandra, and he actually uses the term. And in the 1960s or so, Bipin Chandra actually wrote his PhD thesis on the economic background of Indian nationalism. And there he actually took up the issue, how the moderates, though they were moderates, Dadabhai Naoroji, Ramesh Chandra Das, or other people, what they did was that they gradually showed to the British that your economic administration is not beneficial for India. Not beneficial for India. It is actually exploitative in character. So the moderates actually very moderately, very peacefully exposed the true character of the British, and thereby they started creating a what's called impression that the British rule in India is not beneficial in any way. It is inimical to the Indian interests. So Dadabhai Naoroji's book and all those things you must have read. And Dadabhai Naoroji was a great leader, a great lover of India, who was educated in Bombay, and later on, after 1859, he went to England. He became a member of House of Commons. But in his heart, he always had love for India, for the poor people of India. And that is why poverty became a favorite theme for him. And he went on attacking the British on the theme of poverty. So the British were bleeding India white, he said. And he also created a theory called the drain theory, how British were actually draining the wealth of India. And this economic thing, though whether it is real, the facts and figures, which Dadabhai Naoroji said, many British people did not agree with Dadabhai Naoroji. He said that the facts and figures which Dadabhai Naoroji produced were not true. But they accepted that some amount of drain is taking place, some amount of, because the drain, it constituted the capital of India. I'm sorry, capital, which could have been invested in India. If the British had not taken money from India to England, what would have happened? That money would have remained in India, and it would have become capital for India, and that capital could have been invested in India. India would have undergone industrialization. The British avoided it. The British prevented it. So Dadabhai Naoroji, though he is a British citizen, came down heavily on the British. So these things which we have to bear in mind. So the Indian Renaissance, I'm concluding this, Indian Renaissance, you can say, as a regeneration, laid the foundation for modern Indian nation and modern Indian nationalism. It started the process of India becoming a nation. So the process of making India a nation, it was created, and that is why S.N. Banerjee, Surendranath Banerjee wrote a very famous book called Making India a Nation. Making India a Nation in 1880s or so, he wrote that book. So people, they were aware of the fact that now the process has started. That process is making India a nation by bringing together all people, creating a concept of India, and also by internally removing the inequalities that existed in the form of caste system among caste system. So this is very important. And one last thing that you have to bear in mind, that this Indian regeneration, Renaissance did not extend throughout India. According to Barunde, one of the very famous historians, he is a critic of this concept of regeneration or Renaissance, and that is why that regeneration, is put in inverted comma. To what extent this constitutes regeneration? It did not become widespread throughout India. It actually confined to Bengal only, and that is why many people call it Bengal Renaissance or Bengal regeneration. Barunde says that it actually confined to upper class Bengalis, Jamindari elements and other things, and common people did not get affected by that in Bengal immediately, and it began to spread to other areas only in the later stages. But because of this regeneration that took place in Bengal, well, you see, early nationalists emerged in Bengal. Early nationalists emerged in Bengal, and the Bengali nationalists became the leaders of Indian nationalism. So it's a very interesting development that we can see. So Karl Marx also spoke about these things, how British rule actually, performed are performing two missions. One is the destructive, and another is regenerating. So with these things, I conclude my class, and I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for being so peaceful, controlled, and tolerant.